Thank you. Good evening, dear friends. My name is Ernie Raskauskas, and I am an alcoholic. Thank you, and I'm a member in good standing of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, coming in here tonight, fighting my way through all the smokers and the smoke out front, and then with I use a walker now, coming through the hall and all the people laughing and joking there and hugging one another, and all of the happy, festive crowd, the good mood everyone is in, reminded me of an old story that I like. And I've told it before. I'm going to tell it again. I like the story, and I like the way I tell it. It seems that a man died and went to heaven, and when he got up there, St. Peter said, "Welcome, what denomination do you belong to?" And this man said, "Actually, I don't belong to any denomination. I've just tried to live a good life, do the right thing, and I'm here now." And St. Peter said, "I'm sorry." He said, "We keep people up here by denomination, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you around to some rooms, and I'll let you pick one out for yourself." So the man said, "All right," and they took him to the first room. St. Peter opens up the door, and there is a big group of people in there, perspiring. They're kneeling, and they're clutching their rosaries. And he looks at these people, and he said to St. Peter, "Who are these people?" St. Peter says, "These are the Catholics." He says, "A lot of them don't even know they're up here yet." And the man says, "What other choices are there?" Well, he takes them to the next room. And the next room, everybody is sitting there, very solemn, little thin blue lips, the men with starched collars, the women in tailored suits, and they have their hymnals out, and they're singing Rock of Ages, very severe. And the man said, "Who are these people?" St. Peter said, "These are the Protestants." And the man says, "They're for an eternity. Are there any other choices?" St. Peter says, "There's one more room." So he takes them to the next room. He opens the door up, and both of them are almost knocked over with the tremendous billows of smoke that come out. There's a heavy smell of coffee. People in there are laughing and joking. They're hugging one another. And the guy gets excited, and he says to St. Peter, "Who are these people?" St. Peter says, "We don't know. They won't tell us. They say they're just here a day at a time. You're those people." And you're the people I want to be with. I'd like to thank the committee and Morris, Popeye, and everyone for inviting me. I see I'm listed on the program as being from Tacoma Park, Maryland. And there's probably people here from Tacoma Park that have been in AA 10 or 20 years. And they say, "You know, I've never seen this Ernie at a meeting. Where did he come from?" That's because I'm from Potomac, Maryland, about 20 miles away from Tacoma Park, where I've lived for 37 years, but that's all right. I appreciate the invitation. I guess I'll never know whether I was picked for my message or because of mileage. You know, they pay your transportation here. And I have a summer home up in Bethany, Delaware, that's about 7 miles north of here. I think they give you 41 cents a mile, don't they? Something like. He's with the IRS, he knows. So, $7 or $8 I'm going to get, and they're probably going to say, "Ernie won't want to bother with a check like that," so here I am. So I say, I don't know whether it's because of my message or the mileage. I'd like to thank all of you for sharing part of your evening with me. I'd like to thank the friends of AA that are here. We need you. You know, one of the first times I ever saw our co-founder, Bill Wilson, in person, he gave a talk about the hinges on which the gate of our sobriety swung open. and he talked about all the people who were not alcoholics, but for whose help and love we would not have advanced to the next stage. So the friends of AA, we need to be friendly with our friends. I'm happy that this conference, in its wisdom, always devotes a portion to Al-Anon. My wife, who is in a hospital right now with a broken hip, she's going to be there for a number of weeks, but she's coming along. She's been a member of that blessed fellowship for several decades, and it's enriched her life and the life of our family. So I'm glad for the Al-Anons and Alateens that are here, and you have my special warm greeting. This is a big room, and there are thousands of people, I guess, here, and the lights are bright. But I'm in my imagination, I'm going to, you want me to start all over? In my imagination, I'm going to pretend that it's a beautiful September evening, which it is, and that it's taper time. It's 8 o'clock, that's a nice time of night, and that we're in my living room, and there are 11 or 12 of you, and we're gathered around and we're sharing. That's the feeling I have. You know, our speaker last night, Carl, talked about this stardust or moon dust being sprinkled on the people, and I think it happened here during the countdown tonight, don't you? That was a wonderful thing. Talking about sobriety dates, I'm in the 45th year of my sobriety, and long-term sobriety is important. It gives us an opportunity to grow in experiential knowledge in this program. It gives us an opportunity to grow in wisdom, hopefully, and in grace. But shorter time sobriety is also very important. I've talked to some newer people in the program, and I'd say, how long have you been coming to meetings? And some of them sometimes say, just a year. And I said, you mean just a year? Don't put your sobriety down. If you've been sober 3 months or 6 months, you have been sober longer than 99% of the alcoholics who have ever lived, who have had access to alcohol. And what's more, every one of you in this room is a diamond or a chip in the mosaic of my recovery. I think we're all masterpieces that we're still working on, and I never know whether it's the person with 40 or 50 years or whether it's the person with 30 or 60 days that's going to say something to me that I need to hear, because I believe that the God of our understanding speaks to us through each other, and we never know if he's going to pick the newer person or the long-timer. Sometimes I hear someone at a meeting that has identified themselves as having 90 days of sobriety, and they say something, and I say, my goodness, they're not supposed to know that. How do they know that already? So everybody is important. You know, we have so many gifts here in AA. One thing I love about AA is real. AA is authentic. And here in AA, we don't philosophize, we don't theorize, we don't speculate, rather we share. We share our experience, our strength, and our hope. We report on what we have seen, what we have experienced, what we have lived. And that makes AA so attractive to me. And I think all of us that speak in AA have a duty not to speak past our experience, but only to share what we have personally gained in this fellowship. Now, I think on rare occasions in history that there's a spark of celestial fire that comes down and ignites the life of a person. I think I've seen it happen a couple of times in my life. Once with Mother Teresa and once with Bill Wilson. Both of these people I've had the ineffable privilege of meeting and physically touching. My wife used to cook occasionally at an AIDS home for Mother Teresa and also work at a foundling home, rocking the babies. And when Mother came to Washington, she'd invite us to Mass. So I got to meet her. I was fortunate enough to be the delegate to the General Service Conference in 1967, 1968, while Bill Wilson was still alive. And he used to come into the back of the conference room, and I had an opportunity to meet him and talk to him and fellowship with him. I have a book signed by him, and actually I have a picture of Bill and me, and Jackson here knows I have 10,000 copies of it too, you know. But in any case, I've met both of these people. Now, what is this spark of celestial fire I'm talking about? This is something that inflames and ignites, imparts the life of a person with a message that's so powerful that I have seen it transcend generations. I've been here a couple generations. It crosses continents and oceans. It cuts through socio-economic lines. It's indiscriminate of race or color or creed or ethnicity. This message, I've seen it go around the world through a couple of million people, and I've seen it come out the other end here this week, just as simple and shiny and pristine and honest as it was on June 10, 1935, when Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob met, and that's love and service and the love of one drunk for another. Mother Teresa's message is the same, love and service. Truth is one. And these people who seem to be so dissimilar are so much alike. Now, I didn't have all of these noble, lofty thoughts when I first came to AA. I wasn't thinking like this about Bill Wilson and Mother Teresa, but I can tell you in my life, the eighth promise, I'm going to make sure I don't misstate it, has come through in my life. Our whole attitude and outlook on life will change. My whole attitude and outlook on life has changed. I came here a grandiose, rough, tough, young, relatively young, 33 years old, criminal attorney. I used to say, give me the indictment. We're going to enter a plea of not guilty, Your Honor. We're ready for trial. You know, combative. And there are a lot of I-nevers in my background. And so I was a tough case. I'm lucky that I got the sponsor that I did in AA at the beginning, because the day I came to my first meeting, I heard a working definition of what an alcoholic is. And for the newer person here, let me share it with you. An alcoholic is simply a person that cannot take a drink safely. Now, this isn't very comprehensive. It's not very scientific, but it's very practical. It served me well for 44 plus years. When I say I'm an alcoholic, I don't admit that necessarily I'm neurotic, psychotic, weak-willed, wishy-washy, shiftless, no account, lazy, unemployed, unemployable, of little learning or a poor background, all of the things that I associated with alcoholism and alcoholics before I met people like you. I only admit that I can't take a drink safely, and I think it's important for the newcomer to know this, because that word, alcoholic, has a grinding sound, particularly if you are one who is still practicing his or her art. Also, there were a lot of I-nevers in my background. I was never a daily drinker. I was never a morning drinker. I was never a spree drinker. People this week talked about going to treatment centers. I've never been in a treatment center. They didn't have too many back then anyhow. I've never been divorced because of drinking for any other reason. 44 plus years of sobriety is impressive, but how about 55 years with the same women? That's what I have. I'll tell you, it's been exciting for Kathy. She's had an exciting life. I've never lost a job because of drinking, but I never really had a good one before I came into AA. And so I never had a DUI, but I knew a lot of the cops in Washington, Some of you are saying right now, what's this guy going to talk about tonight? I didn't say I was never arrested because of drinking, did I? Because like a few of you out there have been some unjust arrest in my background. Now, Popeye introduced me as Ernie the Attorney, and I'm going to tell you how I got that nickname here in AA. I acquired what I thought was to be the normal schoolboy, college boy arrest. Any red-blooded, fun-loving young American would acquire. I had, 8, 10, 12 arrests for public intoxication. Innocent arrests. And I wish I had kept better records. I didn't know there would come a day it would be a matter of prestige here in AA. And for all I know, AA could come out with a pension plan. I could lose some of my benefits, maybe. But anyhow, after I became a lawyer, I was only arrested once as a member of the bar. And usually, I like to drink in the better places. I felt I owed that to the profession. And if I had the money, that's where I went. Occasionally, if I felt low or if I felt down, I preferred to drink in a dive, a low-class bar. Because if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling low, and you go to a low-class bar, you can look at the other patrons there and immediately get a lift. I'm better than these people. And there was a place like that in Washington, Jimmy's, a basement type of bar. And I went into Jimmy's one night when I was feeling low, and I was drinking a screwdriver there, and I was having a meditation, and one of those real warm, fuzzy things, thinking about how tough I've had it in life. Said, you got out of law school, Ernie, you fought your way through law school. You got out of law school with a wife and 3 kids and a lot of bills. Other people that went to law school, their family helped them set up a practice or bought them a big car or something like that. And I was starting to, swim around in this self-pity, enjoying it. And I'm in this bar room with these old men. They're lined up at the bar. These old men are there. These guys are all talked out 20 years ago. They're there in the army coats they've been given down at the mission, and they're drinking their wine, and I'm down there and with these old guys, and we're drinking away, and all of a sudden there's a terrible commotion over in a corner of the bar room, and this woman, a drunken woman, isn't that terrible? This drunken woman got in an argument with the owner barkeeper, who was a pretty good belter himself. I don't know whether she got the wrong change, the wrong drink, or what happened, but they got to arguing back and forth and back and forth. And finally, she hurried. The old men are getting annoyed now, because they like a nice, quiet bar room. This is a place where no jukebox, none of that frivolous stuff. It's serious drinking, serious personal fun. And so she hurled some obscenities across the room that visibly shook up these old men. They sort of had the feeling, we thought this was a respectable low-class place. Jimmy got on the phone, called the police up. They were there in 2 minutes. You can't get them today, for murder to come that fast. But they were right there, and I'm watching this drama unfold. And this woman is like Annie the cop fighter. They're trying to drag her out. She's swinging her purse around. They can't get a collar on her. And so they're dragging her and half the furniture out of the place. And as they drag her by my bar stool, in a flash of gallantry, I reached into my pocket and I pulled out one of my lawyer cards. I extended my arm and I said, "Baby, if they give you a hard time, call Ernie the Attorney." I never got to pull my arm back. I got jerked right out to the paddy wagon with her. She and I shared our experience, strength, and hope of each other as we rode down to the number 2 precinct. My law associate had to come out and bail me out the next morning. What a humiliation. But back in those days, my philosophy was Big Ernie works hard and he plays hard. That's still pretty much my philosophy as much as I can implement it these days. And after I was a trial lawyer, after an arduous day in court or a long day in the office interviewing witnesses, listening to witnesses, I've never been a good listener, 5 o'clock would roll around, I'd call up one of my colleagues, one of them would call me up, and would meet someplace for a drink. One of my favorite places was the Jefferson Hotel. Very fashionable. Very fashionable. I don't want to romanticize my drinking because here's the way I see, I hear people talk about they had 10 years of good drinking, 20 years of good drinking. I can tell you this about Ernie. I was never in a drinking situation in my life that I couldn't have been doing something better at the same time. What do you think of that? But anyhow, you can give me an applause on that one. I like that. Give myself a hand on that one. So I would go into this Jefferson Hotel. The organ player knew me, and I used to go in there with real strong rent money, and he could tell the mood I was in as I walked in. If I was in a mood for show tunes, he'd be playing show tunes. If I seemed to have a Spanish mystique about me that night, he'd play my theme song. I get ideas. Adios, muchachos. A tango. And I always went in with a group of guys. I was sort of the leader of the pack. I like to travel with an entourage because I like to share myself. I like people to enjoy me. My scintillating wit and my learning and so forth. So we'd go in, we'd get a table, and I'd order around, and everybody's just getting settled in. I'm already ordering the next round, one of those guys. And after ordering a couple of drinks, I'd slip out to the phone and call my wife up. Kathy's home with the kids. By this time, we had 6 kids. That was one of our problems. We wound up with 8. My wife was always pregnant. Every time I went home, she says, "Ernie, I'm pregnant." We're Catholic, and we practice the rhythm system. We never got the beat. That was our problem. But anyhow, so I'd call my wife up and I'd say, "Look, Kathy, don't hold dinner here. I'm tied up with some clients. As soon as I can shake loose, I'll be right along." And the music, the show tune, South Pacific's playing in the background, And she'd say, "Ernie, please don't stay out and get drunk tonight." Imagine talking to a professional man like that. And I'd say, "Kathy, I'm down here. I'm trying to scratch a living out for you people. You're giving me this static. Tonight I am going to stay out, let you know who's boss in our house." So you got to remember, this is 45 years ago, before women's lib. You can't get away with that stuff now, Everything's changed now, all these terms, I can't keep up with them, like codependence. That's something we used to put on our tax return, Papa, codependent. But anyhow, so now so when my wife was not understanding of me, and I'll say this, I was not a guy that drank at home around the kids. I didn't see that as fun. These little hands with peanut butter and jelly on them, pulling on my pants, fix my wagon, Daddy. I was not one of these guys that sat at home all in my underwear in front of the boob tube with the 6-pack snapping. I like to be downtown. I like that music down there. But anyhow, So when my wife was not understanding like this, she had like given me a pass. I have a free evening now. Because normally, I really never, ever drank comfortably. I always drank with this cloak of guilt or responsibility or whatever. You know, I'd go to the cocktail lounge and I'd say, I'm going to have a couple and I'm out of here at 6:30. Well, you know it didn't work that way. And around 8 o'clock, the party would break up, and the guys would go home, and I'd be going looking for adventures elsewhere. And usually around 2 in the morning, I'd be in some dump with these fantastic newfound friends. I don't want the party to end, and we wind up someplace in Chinatown drinking rot gut hooch out of these little teacups. And I come rolling in 3, 4, 5 in the morning. Now, if you were a serious drinker like I was, maybe that's why you didn't need the morning drink, you know. Anyhow, my poor wife tried every approach in the books. She'd confront me and would get in a big fight. I'd slam the door and walk out, and she learned that confrontation of a practicing alcoholic doesn't work too well. She tried another approach, what I call the clinging vine or grinding approach. She doesn't sound like this, and she doesn't like me to imitate her like this, but here's how I heard her. I'd come down in the morning after a couple of hours of sleep and she'd start to grind. She'd say, Ernie, you were supposed to be here last night to look at the kids' report cards. I have to turn them in today. You weren't here to review them. Ernie, Sister called about Joey's hair. Joey looked like a little Jesus. He had hair down to his shoulders. This is before the Beatles. This is where kids were wearing flat tops back then. I told Sister that you'd take him for a haircut. I don't have a car. I'm pregnant. Ernie, like grinding on my aorta, you know. And I have to sit there and suffer through all of this. But what could I say? Everything she said was gospel true. Now, there's another approach she used. I'd come down in the morning. She wouldn't put the freeze on me, but she wouldn't be friendly. She'd speak when spoken to. All business. Just like those negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis, you know, that say they had a business-like meeting. Anyhow, I'd come down, she's making toast and eggs and everything, and I'm drinking coffee. I'm waiting for the bombs to fall. And some of us are a little impatient. So I'd sit there and I'd say, okay, Kathy, cut the act. I know what's bothering you, my drinking, right? She'd say, that's exactly right. And I'd say, well, I'll tell you, if my drinking bothers you, I'm going to quit. But I said, you know what the real problem is? You're not normal like other women. That's the real problem. Now, this requires a little explanation. My wife and I met when we were both students at the Catholic University of America. She was down there to do graduate nursing work from Pittsburgh. And on her 21st birthday, her girlfriends took her out to dinner on the wharf in Washington. She had her first drink of beverage alcohol, a fancy drink, Pink Lady or Stinger or something like that. And she got this drink as she got a little nauseous, a little tipsy, a little uncomfortable, and she decided she didn't like the stuff. My wife hasn't had a drink from that day till this day. My wife is now 55 years sober. What do you think of that? I says, Kathy, if you were like other women, I'd come home, we could have a gracious drink together. But if my drinking bothers you this much, I'm going to quit. I was taking all this philosophy at Catholic University, and so I'd use these Latin expressions. I'd say, I'm going to quit semper pro semper, which means like always and forever, way out into the ether. And as I would say that, my eyes would sort of well up with the inner goodness I saw in myself. Not only was I going to quit drinking, the kids were bringing these little pictures of lungs and things home from school saying, "Daddy, why do you smoke?" I was going to quit smoking. I weighed 308 pounds then. I was going to go on a diet. I hadn't been to confession in a long time. Saturday, this was all going through my mind as I'm sitting there. I was going to go to confession Saturday, and Sunday march up to the communion rail with the kids. I mean, it makes me misty-eyed now to think of this spontaneous, spiritual, emotional, physical regeneration of a man. I was pretty persuasive. My wife would say, "All right, we'll see if you keep your promise this time." Nowadays they call that an enabling. But I meant what I said. Didn't you mean what you said when you made these promises? I meant what I said. So that first day I would go downtown. Now, by this time in my drinking, I'm having these fantastic 3 and 4 day horrendous hangovers. And I go downtown, and I just go through the motions. I mean, I go downtown and lay down on the couch in my office, but I'm home on time as promised. I'm home at 6 o'clock for dinner. Next day, I'm still hungover. Maybe I can light a test cigarette. Maybe I feel well enough to open the mail up when I get downtown, see if any money came in. And I'm home again at 6 o'clock as promised. Day number 3, things are getting back to normal. I get a little peck on the cheek as I go out. I come home that evening. Kathy has her famous meatloaf dinner. I'm going to give you the recipe. This is 1 pound of basic ground meat, and there's about 6 loaves of bread stuffed into it. This meatloaf was so skimpy that Catholics could eat it on Friday under the old rules. You have to economize like that when you're maintaining those high standards at places like the Jefferson Hotel. After dinner, we'd take the overdue books back to the library, maybe go to the 5 and 10, do a little shopping. Day number 4, I get up. Guess what? I'm well. I feel like a young lion. I'm 33 years old, and I go over and I throw the window open. It's football weather, invigorating, and I charge out of the house with vigor. And boy, when those good days come along, you have to grab them. And I'd go downtown, I'd get a colossal amount of work done in one day. I'd return so many calls and file so many papers and do so many constructive things that I couldn't go home and inflict myself on my family in that agitated state at 5, 6 o'clock. I'd stop for a beer and just ease off. And I would ease off till 3 or 4 or 5 the next morning, and I'm off to the races again. There came a bleak day in February of 1961 when I tried to creep in, get a little sleep, and creep out, and my wife stopped me. She says, "Ernie, I took you for better or for worse. The children weren't a party to that agreement. I'm going to go back to your aged parents in western Pennsylvania, my own, whichever will have us. Any life is better than this." And I didn't even argue with her. I got in the car and I went downtown, and I wasn't humming those show tunes. I was hungover, and along with the hangover, I felt like as if a moral 2x4 lash of remorse had been broken across my back. You know what remorse is? That feeling of phoniness and emptiness and worthlessness. And I went downtown, and I had to be in the U.S. federal court at 10 o'clock that morning. And I went to court, and I might not be here tonight. It's terrifying when you stop and think through the happenstance, or maybe the grace, of how some of us found our way here. I had to be in federal court at 10 o'clock to argue a motion, and I was number one on a calendar. And that put me out of the court at 11 o'clock. And I stood there at the corner of 3rd and C Street. You could see the Capitol building. We were in the shadow of the Capitol there. It was a bleak, gray, funereal day. The snow was dirty in the gutter. This is several weeks after Kennedy had been inaugurated. It had been a tremendous snowstorm then. And I just couldn't go back to my office with me as company. I needed to talk to somebody. Now, almost as if I was directed, I went down the side street from this courthouse to the office of another lawyer. He and I had never been drinking buddies. Our paths had crossed that way. He had been involved in one case, a case in which we had pleaded insanity, and he had been involved in that case because of some expertise he had. There's a few of you, I know Bobby here over knows him, Hugh M. And I went to his office and I said, Hugh, I need to talk to somebody. My wife is going to leave me. Come on down the corner and have some coffee with me. And he said, sit down, I'll send out for coffee. So I sat down and we got to talking. Somehow the subject came around to the evils of booze. And Hugh told me, he says, you know, Ernie, I haven't had a drink in 6 months. I says, that's wonderful, Hugh, because everyone around the courts knows what a drunk you are. He didn't like that too much. Then he dropped a bombshell on me. He said, I'm in AA. I said, no. You, a former bomber pilot? You, an ex-assistant United States attorney? You, a rough and tumble criminal lawyer? You're with those people that rattle those tambourines or whatever they do there? I can't believe it. Now let me set the context of my life. At the moment Hugh made this disclosure, my wife was in her 7th pregnancy. We had no hospital insurance, no life insurance, no car insurance. I had a car that had been repossessed a couple of times. And my car, the women will understand this, my car looked like it had been starched but not pressed. It had this real wavy sides, no hubcaps, smooth tires. Our furniture looked like something the Flintstones had given to Goodwill. We were 5 months behind on the rent. I hadn't filed a tax return, Popeye, in 5 years. Imagine saying that in front of an IRS man. Anyhow, no credit cards, no bank account, no checking account. The last deposit I made to the National Bank of Washington, my deposit bounced. You hear people bouncing checks? My deposit bounced. They sent my money back. They said, you're too much trouble. You know, that bank went down the tubes about 15 years ago. I'm here sober and solvent tonight. You hear of people that owe their lawyers money on these drunk driving cases, don't you? I owed my clients money. I used to borrow money from my clients. So I said, no credit cards. We owed maybe $25,000, $30,000. That would be like $150 today. Nothing to show for it. And when Hugh told me he was in AA, you know what emotion I felt? Pity. I felt sorry for him. I felt sorry for him. Just then the phone rang, and it was my sponsor to be calling, the great Buck Doyle. And he says, Hugh, I'm going to come by and pick you up for the AA luncheon. And Hugh said, come on by. He says, by the way, there's a fat one here I'm not getting too far with. And maybe you can do something with him. So Hugh hung up, and he said, Ernie, he said, we have these luncheons in AA. He said, and we have sponsors in AA. You have to meet my sponsor. He's a man's man, real he-man. He flew with General Chennault over in China with the 14th Air Force, the Flying Tigers and so forth. And I said, it sounds good, Hugh, but I says, I'm not in the mood to meet him. I'm not in the mood to go to some luncheon. And he says, come on to the lunch. He says, I'll pay for your lunch. And I says, no thanks. Now the luncheon was at the Marriott Hotel, 14th Street. At that time, It was the only Marriott hotel in the world. Since then, I've seen them all over the world. But that's how long ago that was, to place it that way in that time frame. And I said, no thanks. And all of a sudden, a light bulb went on in my head. I said, wait a minute, you. If I go to this luncheon with you, will you call my wife up, you guys, and tell her I've filled the forms out, whatever you have for this AA thing? And he said, we don't have any forms, but we will give her a call. So I went to the luncheon, and I was impressed with the guys I met there. They were my kind of people. They were the drinking set, only they're sitting around eating these big ice cream sundaes, discussing politics, sports, the market, AA, everything else. And we came back to Hugh's office, and Buck got on the phone and called my wife up. We used to have a lot of utility problems in those days. You know what I mean? Luckily, the phone was on. Utility problem. We used to have a lot of nice candlelight dinners. You know what that means? Anyhow, he got on the phone, called my wife up, and he said, Kathy, he says, I'm sitting here with your husband, Ernie. Ernie thinks he might have a problem with alcohol. I'm in AA, and what do you think? And what do you think my wife thought, you know? So he said, you might not have any faith in this big clown. Maybe you can have some faith in this program. Ernie's agreed to go to a meeting tonight. Why don't you stick around and see what happens? Well, the poor woman couldn't even put bus fare together to go back to Pittsburgh. She said, all right. So that night they stayed right with me the rest of the day. I went to my first meeting, absolutely under false colors. I walked into that room, South Arlington, Virginia, and I got sober in Virginia. I've never lived there, but my sponsor lived there. And in those days, now you might not believe this, we used to do what our sponsors told us to do. I had a very tough sponsor, very judgmental. At the time, he was sponsoring several lawyers and several priests. As a matter of fact, he had the nickname of Monsignor Doyle, they used to call him. We used to always pray that he'd be made a bishop. That way we'd only have to kiss his ring. I mean, this guy was tough. So I went to that meeting that first night. I felt like there were 80 people in a room, and I felt like they were divided into two groups. There were 79 in one group, and there was me in the other group. I didn't feel comfortable there. Many of us don't at the beginning. And here was this young man celebrating his first anniversary. His parents were in the front row just exuding gratitude. I was impressed. You couldn't help but be impressed. I thought to myself, this is a wonderful program for these people. And maybe for the first time in my colossally arrogant life, I started to follow directions. Buck told me to buy the big book, I bought it. He told me to read it, I devoured it. I don't think you can digest it in a lifetime, though. You know, if I pick the big book up today and I read something in it, it reads differently than it did 10 years ago, because I think we grow in our recovery and our knowledge in this program as we move along and as we continue on our journey. And I took to AA like a duck takes to water. And so many good things happened to me with such rushing speed that I actually rushed right past the 12 steps of our program. Rushed right past. I got involved in a lot of cases where I started to make money. And when I came to AA, now here I'm a guy that's been trained as a lawyer to delineate, discern, digest, and pick something apart and read it. And here these steps were just unintelligible to me. I didn't see how they applied to my life. Sought through prayer and meditation. Oh, that's good stuff. But I thought, if I can get my hands on $25,000, $35,000, I could put a lot of fires out. That's how I was thinking in those days. So, and I thought AA was about not drinking and getting stuff. We needed stuff. I had 8 kids. I mean, we needed mattresses We needed bedclothes, we needed towels, we needed stuff. I got the stuff. I got a lot of stuff. I got the stuff, and I can't tell you how many years went by. It's the grace of God that kept me sober. Now, I was doing a lot of good things. I got involved in the Boy Scouts. I got involved in the trial lawyers. I became president of the trial lawyers in the District of Columbia. I got involved in the Fathers Club. I got involved in the Alumni Association. I got involved in a lot of church activities. I did a lot of good things. But those were activities. Those were outside. AA action is inside. I didn't know that. And I got the stuff. I got a lot of stuff. I got the nice hedges and the big cars and the big house and the kids in the good schools and the Caribbean vacations. I got all this stuff, and I was miserable. I was as miserable as I ever was drinking. And then I had to come and take a look at this program. The third paragraph to our book, 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, the third paragraph to the foreword, something I usually never read, says the 12 steps of AA are a group of principles, spiritual in nature, which, if practiced as a way of life, will remove the obsession to drink and permit the sufferer to live a life that is happily and usefully whole. That's the name of the game for me, happily and usefully whole. Well, I don't have a whole lot more to say, but I'd like to say this. There's so many things I didn't know about AA. I didn't know that here in AA we can be mutually vulnerable. I start learning that the day I went to my first meeting. I was invited next door for ice cream. The chairman of the group lived next door to the meeting. I was invited there for ice cream, and I was the center of attraction. I was the new kid on the block. This AA is a funny organization. The worse your credentials are here, the better they like you, because they know you need to be kicked around a little. But you know what? The people at that first night and at that meeting, after the meeting, in an unspoken way, they conveyed an idea to me, a feeling, a mood. Ernie, you're worth getting well. You have intrinsic dignity because of your humanity. We'll love you till you can learn to love yourself. We need ego deflation at depth here in AA, but we also need healing affirmation. And that's why we can come to these meetings and take the mask off that so many of us have lived behind so much of our lives, and not be afraid to let everybody see us as we are, because we know it's going to be okay. It's okay for me, a big guy, a rough, tough criminal lawyer, it's okay for me to let you know that I'm weak, frail, vulnerable, that I need help. That's okay. So that's one of the great gifts of this fellowship, amongst many. Well, what's life like now for me in this fellowship? Our co-founder, I can't believe how he could have written a big book only a couple of years sober, to have the wisdom that he did, and all the things he read. You're missing the treasures of AA if you don't read books like As Bill Sees It, and the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. Reread them. The wisdom that's there is precious. Bill Wilson said that in one of his letters, that there comes a time in our sobriety when we have to become citizens of the world again, and we have to move to some extent beyond the fellowship of AA and return to the world we rejected and perhaps rejected us, and get involved in things for the good of others. I've had the opportunity to do that. Some of my friends here in AA, some of them sitting right up in the front row here, have helped me in that. My family and a number of my friends here work with abandoned children of alcoholics in Lithuania, a country my forebears came from. I told you about my wife's work for with Mother Teresa. We went over there and cooked a meal when we were able to. We're at the point now where we need somebody to start cooking meals for us. But this involvement has been very important to me, the activity not within only AA, but beyond AA in the greater community. Because we have a message here. You know, we have something the rest of the world sadly lacks tonight, I think. Anyhow, I learned here, I never dreamed when I came here that I thought at best this would be like an endurance contest, a lifetime endurance contest. I never dreamed that I would learn to want to not drink. And I have not drunk all over the world. Now, for the newer people here, this has to be impressive to see 3,000 people in this room. But AA is even much bigger than this. We have over 100,000 groups around the world. We have more agents than the CIA does. There are over 100,000 places around the world I can walk in and say, my name's Ernie, I'm an alcoholic, and these people will already know a whole lot about me. But they'll welcome me and I'll feel welcome. Isn't that a wonderful thing? And we don't talk past our experience, I've had the privilege of being in the meetings all over the world, places like Athens and Rome and Paris and Warsaw, Vilnius, Lithuania, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Singapore, Tokyo, Sydney, all of the states except North Dakota. For some reason, they don't want me to come to North Dakota. But I understand it's pretty cold up there anyhow. And it's the same beautiful program all over the world. So I learned here to want to not drink. Tonight, there's peace in my heart as far as alcohol is concerned. A great saint, if we were to pick a saint in AA, I'd pick St. Augustine. St. Augustine was a man that had tremendous passions of the flesh. And the way he practiced his sixth step, he would say, catch me, Lord, but not yet. Not yet. Catch me, but wait a little while. St. Augustine said, peace is that tranquility which comes from order. When there's order in our life, there's a beautiful stillness. It's like the back bays here when the water is at eventide. And that's how I feel in my relationship to alcohol. And doesn't it make sense that if the steps of this program work that way for my alcoholism, that applied to the rest of my life, I can develop a program for living? The answer is yes. From you people I have learned that I can't be happy, joyous, and free on last week's spirituality. This is a today program. There's a new ball game every morning. You've got to stay in, you've got to stand up to the plate, and you have to take a swing every day. Well, let me conclude with this, the future of AA. You and I are here on this beautiful September evening celebrating life. There are a lot of people out there still fighting this thing. Still fighting this thing. Tonight, as you and I are here, somewhere nearby here, there's some little guy that's died a drunkard's death. It's okay to die from cancer. It's still not okay to die a drunk. His family is there in the final cruel indignity he could inflict on them. The rest of people think that he did. He died a drunk, and his family is there, half grief and half relief. Some lady like one of you tonight, I'm a lawyer, I've seen it, will pulverize some kid with her car tonight. Wake up in the morning behind bars, never know what she did. Some lawyer that's helped a lot of people in his time, his drinking's finally caught up with him. He's going to be disbarred this week. You and I are here celebrating life. How is it that we're here? What's the explanation? The only explanation I have is that this was a gift maybe given to you but this once, and me but this once. We have to look, the duty I feel I have beyond my own sobriety is to keep this program for generations yet unborn. My wife and I have been very blessed. We have 8 children. All 8 of them are university graduates. Half have advanced degrees. None of them even smoke. A couple of lawyers, a doctor, a couple of teachers. We've been blessed. We have 13 grandchildren. My illness could skip a generation, fall on some of them like a plague. I want this program to be, if they need it for them, like it was for me, simple and honest. We can't take AA for granted as we go. And you know, the newest person in AA, there are people here 1 or 2 and 3 and 5 days, the newest person in this room in AA, from a historical perspective, is going to be looked upon as amongst the founding generations of AA. We're still a baby organization. So, and we have a lot of work to do. There's several 100 million people out there tonight, worldwide, that need our help. Well, this is it. This might be my swan song on speaking to larger groups. I'll tell you, this has been very meaningful, very enriching for me this evening. It's been a good week, I know, for many of you people. Many of you came here at the beginning of the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday. We still have tomorrow. A nice week. I think there's going to be a conference that's not going to be a weekend. It's not going to be a week. It's going to be forever. It's going to be at a place called Happy Destiny. Till we meet there, may God keep you and bless you. Thank you.